What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Leading Leaders. We changed our venue today to Starting Point at, hold on. We changed our venue today to Starting Point Church here in Seminole, Oklahoma at 1100 North University Street. We're in our merchandise room with my good buddy, Josh Pollock. How about you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Josh Pollock. I am the student minister at FBC Seminole. I celebrate 16 years in May as the student minister there. Have loved every minute of it. My dad was in the Air Force growing up, so we moved around, but Seminole was kind of always home to us. And so when I came back for my senior year of high school and college, fell in love with serving the church, with loving the church, felt this call to ministry, surrendered to that call, and then started serving. And I've been there 16 years in May.
That's awesome. Well, and that brings me to my first question.
Yeah.
Honestly, was what tugging on your heart actually brought you into the student ministry field?
Yeah, so I was a product of student ministry from all over the country. You know, as we got orders to move, we would move, and I would be in other churches. And I always felt like in these new schools that I would go to, I never really connected with people because nobody wants to make a new friend. Especially the older you get in high school, it's kind of like an outsider, but I always felt like I had a place in youth ministries. And so I've always enjoyed youth ministry, and then seeing FBC Seminole and their youth ministry and how it shaped me, I was like, man, that's what I want to do. You know, I always in the back of my mind. And when I was in high school, I kind of felt this call to ministry at a church camp and kind of ignored it, really didn't tell anybody about it. And it wasn't until my wife and I had been married a full year, and I was actually serving as a sponsor at church camp at Falls Creek, and I was serving as a sponsor and felt the Lord call me into ministry, say, hey, I'm tired of you running. I'm tired of you doing things your way, which I'd been doing for a while. I've got about 4 years of living stupid, living for Josh. And I said, all right, God, if this is what you want, I'm all in, but you've got to convince my new bride, of a year that I'm going to give up this degree that I'm working, not give up this degree, but I'm not going to use this degree that I'm pursuing with advertising and public relations, and instead ministry. And so that night we're in the car, we're driving home from camp, and I tell her, I say, hey, I have to tell you something. And I told her I surrendered to a call to ministry that night, and her mouth opens and just kind of a gasp. And I was like, oh, great, she's going to tell me this is not for us. And she said, tonight the Lord called me to be a pastor's wife, to be a minister's wife. And so we got to experience that call together, and visited with our pastor that next Sunday morning. And he shared they were looking at starting a middle school ministry position. The youth minister at the time needed some help, and so they brought me in a part-time capacity within about a month of that call. And I've been surrendering there. But I see the product of youth ministry. I see the benefits of youth ministry, training up not the future church, but the church, because they're part of the church, and the benefits of them growing in that. And I want to be a part of that. I know what it's like to be the new kid who walks into a room, of 100, 50 kids, and to feel like an outsider, because that was me. And so I know how to grab those kids and to bring them into the fold, to make them feel like they're a part of the ministry. So I see the major benefits of youth ministry. And so I think that's why God really laid that on my heart.
That's awesome, man. It's funny because I guess I'm not really the polar opposite, but I did fight my calling to youth ministry as well. I did. And it's funny because he actually called me and my wife to children's ministry first. And I was like totally against it at first. I was like, God, man, this is my mom and dad's ministry. This is not my ministry, because my mom and dad's been doing ministry for 30 something years. And majority of their capacity was in children's ministry. And I was like, man, God, that's my mom and dad's. That's not me. And me and my wife did a children's church pastor for, I think, almost 2 years. And when I say that grew me so much, it was not even funny, because these kids would ask me questions and I'd just be starstruck. Like, I don't have the answer to that question, And, we ended up leaving and coming here, and that was one of the things I said when I came here. I don't want no responsibilities. I don't want none of it.
Be careful what you tell
God. And that was my stipulation I made with them. I was like, I'll go to church, but I don't want no responsibilities. And we were here for 3 weeks, and Pastor Jeff pulls me and Michaela in his office, and he's like, hey, I need to speak to you and your wife. And I was like, looking at Michaela, what'd you do? Because I know I didn't do nothing. So we get in there, and he's like, man, y'all guys don't have no idea, but I've been praying for workers to come in. I really feel like y'all are called to be youth leaders. And it was hilarious, because it was like God stuck his arm around me. I was like, hey, remember when you said you're not doing something? This is what you're going to do. but like you said, man, I see so much benefit
Oh
in
yeah.
youth ministry, and even so, our youth ministry technically consists of, from high school all the way down,
Hmm.
and we have teens and kids, but it's all under one umbrella of the youth ministry. And like when people don't see the benefit in youth ministry, it drives me insane
Oh yeah.
because I'm like, man, y'all guys don't even know what you're missing.
Yeah.
And because I've been challenged by kids more than I have been by adults.
Oh yeah.
Like kids ask me questions, I'm like, dang, that is a solid question.
Yep.
Let me do some research on that before I give you an answer. But
They're always wanting to grow. They're always wanting to know. And that's what I love is they've got this hungry mind. And
mm,
it's not stories they've grown up with their entire life that they take for granted in their 50s and 60s and don't think about the wonder and awes of the Bible or of theology topics. And kids develop these things and they hear these things like, I want to know more about that. So they're very inquisitive. So that's what I
oh
love working
yeah,
with teenagers is
for
they
sure.
want to know those things.
Oh yeah, dude, absolutely. I completely agree with you on that because they're
Yeah.
very like, hey, but why?
Yeah.
Why is this?
Yep.
Like, I get it. I get that this happened, but why did it
Yeah.
happen? And but that helps me too.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, grow in my spiritual walk with
Hmm.
God because now I'm diving deeper into His
Oh yeah.
Word, trying to find this answer for this kid that's asked me why, and I'm like, I don't know why right now.
Yeah.
Let me find out.
Yep.
But and that's one of the things I think is funny is uh, youth pastors and stuff always think that you have to have all the answers.
Right.
But in all actuality, you not having the answer is probably some of the things that is best because they can see that you're growing with them.
Yep. They see that that you don't know everything. I'm
Yeah.
not the end all be all, but I always tell students, I don't know, but let me get back to you. And
Yep.
then I get to bring them in and show them how I got that. So if a
Mm.
kid's asking about a specific verse, I can pull out a commentary. I can pull out, a Greek lexicon if I want to get that deep into it, a Hebrew Bible and talk about the word connections and associations. I'm like, I arrived at this answer by doing this. And they see how they can do it for themselves.
Yeah.
Because it's not just informing them. It's let me take you along the process that I
Yep.
used to get here. So the next time you have a question, you'll know how to do it yourself and be able to grow that way up.
I like that a lot. That is very good because uh, we went to Winter Jam this year with some of our youth, and first time that they ever actually brought all the youth pastors and youth ministers down to talk
Oh
to
yeah.
them, and we went down there, and Chance, the Winter Jam pastor, said the most amazing thing that I've never thought of before. He said, "Man, y'all guys are youth ministry, so that means that you are not just being the quarterback anymore. You're training the quarterback to take
Mm-hmm.
over and do all the plays." And I was like, dang, that's insane. I never thought of it
Yeah.
like that. And it's so true.
Yeah. It always used to get under my skin when people and speakers would do this a lot at events. They'd look at the youth and go, "You guys are the future of the church." And I'm like, no, they're the church now. If I truly believe that if students can understand concepts like Ed Newton, evangelist, and he's a pastor down in Houston, says that if students can understand words like frappuccino, trigonometry, and mayonnaise, they can understand resurrection, sanctification, glorification.
Mm,
So if the ability for their mind to grow is there in school stuff, so why aren't we challenging them in other things
yep.
and
So
being
true.
able to grow them up in those things?
Well, there are ambassadors.
Yeah.
They're God's ambassadors to go because they can get to talk to people every day that we
Mhm.
don't even get to talk to. We might be able to interject one day. Hey, let me throw some pizza at you and talk to you.
Right.
But they get to talk to these people every day.
They're living it out every day with their
Yep.
lives around these students. Absolutely.
All right, we'll go to our next
Okay.
question. One of my good friends actually asked this question, and I really didn't have an answer for him because we've done this in ours, but I was going to ask you
Yeah.
since you have a larger. How does small groups work in yours? Is it a good implementation?
Yeah, so we do small groups on Sunday morning, and then we do kind of a discipleship group thing through our Sunday night, and I'll break each one of those down. So we do a Wednesday night gathering of students where we just we have worship, we preach, and then we have a response time to the word, and we do that every Wednesday night with no small groups. I know a lot of youth guys that do small groups on Wednesdays. I just don't have the volunteers to be able to pull that off
Mm,
in the middle of the week. So we do small groups on Sunday morning. And so we gather together, we open with prayer, just some quick announcements. So we send them to small groups based on their grade and sex. And they have a Bible study together. And that's where they get to grow a little bit with a teacher who's invested in them, who gets to grow in them, another adult leader who speaks truth into them. And honestly, I've got some phenomenal youth workers at our church, and they'll go to basketball games and football games, and they'll do parties and celebrations and other things throughout the year with them. My wife just took her small group down to the Texas Tulip Farm, to go spend the afternoon and go do that. I've got a group that's coming over to somebody's house this week to watch the OU gymnastics,
Cool.
and just doing life together, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where you get this group that comes together that does life. And then on Sunday night, we do Celebrate Recovery Ministry. And then for the students, we do Landing. And this idea is that we all come to church with our hurts, our habits, and our hangups and our sinful problems. And we can work on those together. God calls us to work on those. He calls us to grow through those, to not see those as a hindrance, but how to work through those. And so on Sunday nights at the Landing, we have a time of worship, a time of preaching, a shorter Bible study, if you will, that teaches on one of those topics of the Landing, one of those Celebrate Recovery topics. And then we have small groups that meet, and they're more of a discipleship group based, where we've got kind of our guys and girls based on what our groups are. And we ask 6 basic questions, pretty much based off the Jewish Shema from Deuteronomy. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, your strength. And then Jesus adds, love your neighbor as yourself. So we do check-in questions where we ask, what are you getting out of worship? How are you enjoying worship? What are you reading in your Bible? What stood out to you from the sermon? How are your relationships doing? Mentally, how are you doing? How are you doing? A lot of students sometimes get asked that question, how are things going? And they just say good. Well, we want to go deeper, and we ask, how are you doing? And then we wrap that up with, how can we be praying for you? So those 6 questions we ask every single week, week in and week out, with the same group of students. So they know coming to the table that if I haven't read my Bible this week, I'm going to say, I haven't been reading this week. And then so we get to encourage them, hey, make sure you're reading this week. Make sure you're finding time for that. Or hey, I'm having a tough time with my brother. We got into a fight this week. And okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk through that. And allows us to have some follow-ups through some of that. So why youth ministry grows through some of our large events, that's where our numbers come from. We really see the discipleship and the buildup happen through a lot of the small group stuff that we do.
I like that. That's good, because, and that's one of the things that we try to do in our ministry as well is on Wednesdays, Wednesdays we'll have our normal service, but at the same time, we'll change it to, okay, well, this week we're actually going to separate, and we're going to ask y'all guys some questions, and we separate the age groups,
right?
Because I don't care what anybody says, man. A 13 to 16-year-old is going to go through something different than a 11, 12-year-old, and younger, man. And if you don't learn how to separate those and help them deal with those issues that they're going through right now, you try to blanket everything,
right?
And when you're blanketing everything, you're not getting
to the heart of the issues. Yep.
And that's one of the things that I've seen in small groups that is phenomenal, because then they actually branch out and open up more, because one, not everybody's in their chili, wondering, oh, well, that guy, I can't believe that person did that. But that's what I 100% agree with you on, asking them, how are you?
Right.
Because that's one of the questions, and even adults now in church, every time we come to church, oh, how are you? Well, I'm doing fantastic. In all actuality, their insides are burning down because they're just wrecked on the inside, but I got to paint this picture. And that's one of the things that we stress to our youth is, man, I don't want to see the picture of you. I want to see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to see your social media posts. I want to see who you are for real. And that's one of the things that I found was very helpful in our small groups, is that I don't have to see the prettied up picture of you. I get to see the behind the door, and see the real you, what problems you're going through. And that was my advice that I gave to my buddy. But I was like, man, I know you, because he's sitting on a capacity of 150, 200 students. And I'm like, that's numbers, man. If you have enough workers, a small group would be awesome. But if you don't have enough workers, then you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, you can only disciple so much without taking other people on. I think where I'm at, I could probably only properly disciple maybe 10 to 15 kids max out of anybody that we've got. And that's grouping them up together, which means you may have some kids that aren't going to be open up and willing to share, versus a one-on-one discipleship meeting. I've got a student that I meet with, and we walk through some theology books together once a week, just one-on-one. ask him those same questions. He answers honestly. And then as a leader, I answer honestly with him too, because I want him to know that I struggle too, that I'm having a hard time in this, or I'm celebrating this season of life, or this is something I've been looking forward to. And so I tell him, as long as you're open and honest with me, I'm going to be open and honest with you about some of these things that I'm going through, that I'm struggling with, and then hold each other, lift each other up in prayer as we walk through some of those things. And,
well, it helps you hold each other accountable, right?
Right.
Like it's one of the things me and one of my buddies says is it puts you in check, you know? And I love when God puts me in check, because, you know, stuff that you don't realize that you're doing, God's like, hey, what is that? And you're like, oh yeah. I need to fix that. You know, and a perfect thing is when I first started out this, I asked a bunch of questions to a bunch of different leaders, and, you know, that's what I was basis going off of. And God slapped me with, well, okay, you're established now. Are you going to let me talk? And I was just like, dang, you're right. Yeah. You are 100% right. And, you know, and people think like, oh, God checking you means that he's punishing you. No, literally it's God saying, hey man, I thought you said we were going to do this, not just you. Yep. You know, it's just stuff like that. Like that's goes into having a relationship with them. Right. Yep. And that's the same thing with my kids. If I can't say, hey man, that's all right, but it would be better if you did it this way. You know, why wouldn't I expect that from my father?
Absolutely.
You know, that's one of the things that I love. You know, it is being open with your students, where you're like, man, I've had a rough day today, but God's brought me here, and he's working through my problems. Yep. You know, and that's one of the things I loved when we first started out our youth group. We got to give all of our testimonies, you know, so the kids could actually see who we were, you know, where we came from and where God brought us to. And, you know, some of the kids are like looking at me like, whoa, like that, he brought you far. Yeah. And I was like, you have a very small idea, because I couldn't give my entire thing.
Right, you know? Right.
And I was like, but at the same time, you're like, but now you know that I'm not lying to you when I say I know what you're going through this situation, you know? And I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to get through in youth ministry is, hey man, I'm not just blowing smoke at you.
Right.
Because I've been there.
Yeah.
You know, I know how to get to this place because God showed me, hey, these are the steps that you need to take to get to this further position.
Yeah, our worship pastor says you're either going into a storm, you're in the middle of the storm, or you're coming out of the storm. And if you've come out of the storm, you can help somebody else who's going in the storm.
Oh, yeah.
And so we have those stories. So why wouldn't we tell them?
Absolutely.
To be able to help other people.
And he says our testimonies, you know, we'll draw people and show them the word of God through our testimonies. And why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I use it in my testimony all the time, like talking to guys at work. Man, yeah, God's brought me through anger issues. And I used to be a really mad guy. And I was like, it's really hard to make me mad now. Yeah. Like it's weird because like I'm polar opposite.
I don't know. I've seen you on the baseball field.
That's not mad. That's
yeah. No, but I know what you're saying. And they get to see, like, I've never seen you that upset. And you're like, well, I could tell you some stories about how upset I got. And they are shocked to hear that's how you used to be, and say, this is who I was, this is who I am now, and this is who I'm going to be as I continue in this relationship with God.
So. Absolutely. Dude, that's good. So this is a big one for me, and I'm happy that I get to ask you this question. I'm happy God gave me this question for you, because I feel like this is something that we are going through together. How important is it to network between other churches' youth groups?
Yeah, so I think that's really important. We get to work together a lot through Fellowship of Christian Athletes here in Seminole through FCA, get to partner through this leadership thing through the school, that it's not your church, it's not my church, it's not this church, it's the school, but then we get to come lift them up. I think it's vitally important, because I don't see a competition between churches. I see Jesus doing Jesus things through our groups, and why wouldn't we want to come together and
absolutely
be able to do those things together? And so it's really cool to see these FCA meetings where you've got a worship band from this church and a speaker from this church and students who are represented from all over, that they realize that there are more Christians in my school. There's people that I don't talk to at the lunch tables because I don't know them, but really we're on the same team here. And be able to have those like-mindedness as you come together for those kind of things, and you see the strengths, you see the weaknesses, you get to be encouraged, you get to have conversations. I remember as you coach my son's baseball team, having conversations about youth ministry, and you asking questions at practice, going, let me ask you about this, so your thought about this, and being able to have those conversations where you get to bounce ideas off of each other.
Oh yeah.
Say, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. I think you guys were planning a softball tournament we were going to try to come
Yep.
be a part of. And it's like, why wouldn't we want to come together with a community of other believers who have like-minded hearts to be able to come together and just fellowship and just be the church and just enjoy one another's company. I think it's vitally important for churches to realize. Otherwise, you get that island mentality that we're the only church here.
Yep.
We're the only ones doing this, when really we're all doing the same thing. And you can come together for greater numbers for those kind of things.
That's good. What you said is perfect, that island mentality. And Pastor Jeff hits on this all the time, where he's like, it's not just going to be us and going to heaven.
Yeah.
It's not just going to be Pentecostal. It's not going to be just Baptist. It's not going to be First Assembly. He's like, it's all of us. You know, he said, don't get me wrong. There's people that are sitting in these pews that aren't going to go up.
Right. He
said, but we're not the only denomination. I think that's what everybody gets stuck on, is the denominational game. And I'm a firm believer that all of us come together, you know, in a movement of God. You know, that's what a revival truly is, right? It is everybody coming together and just letting God be God. And if we have those true same beliefs,
right,
which we do,
right,
you know, why wouldn't we want to share God with as many people as we could? And that's one of the things that, like, softball tournaments, you know, kickball tournaments, stuff like that, I think those are huge, because now we're giving our youth the opportunity to say, hey man, I know you don't want to come to church, but we're doing this thing this weekend. If you want to come, you know, you can meet my youth pastors. And you know, that's how you grow those relationships with kids, right? Everybody thinks that, oh, I can't grow a relationship outside of the church. And in all actuality, you grow more relationships outside of the church. You know, you get to know kids on a deeper level when you're walking around selling pulled pork sandwiches at Made in Oklahoma Festival, you know, when you're talking to people.
Yeah, that's so I substitute teach a couple days a week at the high school, middle school, and I get to meet students from all over Seminole, let alone all over ministries, and we get to talking about what churches they go to, and whether they come here, they go to IFC, they come, you know, to FBC Seminole, and you need to have these conversations with kids and see where they're at in their faith journey, with not the intention of recruiting, not the intention of like, oh, come to my church, we're better. Like, that's not. I'm like, hey, what church do you go to? And they tell me, I'm like, that's awesome. I'm glad that you're being fed there. What's your youth pastor's name? I'm like, oh, I know him. We came together for See You at the Pole or for an FCA event, you know, and be able to just to have, oh, he's a great dude, you know, I love the way he does this, and be able to pump them up to their own students and stuff. It's been a really cool opportunity.
And that's I had one of ours that they're twin brothers, and one of the brothers came to y'all guys, and one of them goes to ours, and I told him, I was like, if you weren't going to Josh, me and you'd be fighting. And I said, you're lucky I know you're a youth pastor, you know. And it's the same thing where you're like, man, I know that guy. He will be able to help you through your walk of life. You know, it's not just somewhere that you're going to, you know, oh well, they got a better basketball place than us. You know, you're also going to get fed.
It's exactly right.
You know, it's not like, oh well, they have a better complex than we do, and then that's the thing that people get confused is, man, well, I got to have the best of the best, which is awesome. You know, God moves in that way, and that's awesome. You know, the attraction, you know, attracts people. But at the same time, if somebody can walk in and they just get smoked with the presence of God, and they're like, oh, I don't know what this feeling is, but I like it. You know, that's what draws somebody in. It's not the flashy show sportsmanship, you know, it's the presence of God, walking in the presence of God, and you're just like, I'm just walking to a sheep walking in this room. Like, what's going on?
The famous saying, what you draw them to is what you're drawing them with is what you're drawing them to. So if you're relying on some of those flashy things, that's the only reason they're coming, and they're not going to grow beyond that. So when it's time to move away from those things into other things, they have no interest. But if they know that, hey, we're going to take the word serious, we're going to take worship serious, this is the time that we've set apart. Like, we've enjoyed the time at the basketball courts or playing volleyball or Xbox or outside rec, whatever it is that you're doing. And now we're going to get together and do the word, that they see that's the reason we gathered. The other stuff is just fluff along the side.
Oh yeah. That's just the fun, you know? And I say that's just the fun, but in all honesty, dude, I think I have more fun when we get into the word, because it brings all those questions.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? That's just the out coding. Let me say it that way. That's just the out coding. The real fun's on the inside. And that's what I think is awesome, is because, you know, you're like-minded the way that we are, to where, yeah, it's cool. We'll play basketball, we'll play football, volleyball, whatever. We'll do all those things. but this is our primary focus.
Right. That's the whole reason we're gathered.
Is God, you know, and you can say all you want, but this is why we're here. The Word of God is why we're here.
Absolutely.
That's good. So this is good, also a good one for you. So over the years, what are some of the issues that you've ran into walking in your youth ministry?
Yeah. So 16 years, I'm old. It has changed dramatically. It is. I tell students, I think this is one of the toughest generations to live in nowadays, with the draw to just sin and self-glorification. When I first started in ministry, some of the issues that we had that our youth were facing were minor. You know, you'd have a kid who may dip, or a kid who may smoke a cigarette, you know, every once in a while. And you have that conversation with a 17-year-old kid who's dipping. And that seemed to be kind of the extent of it. I mean, there were still some secret sins you got to deal with. And then you fast forward a few years, and we really got into around the 2010s, a lot of self-harm, a lot of isolation, depression, and things they were suffering with. And we walked through a season of that with students, where we had students who were self-harming and had to get DHS involved and get them to proper counselors and be able to minister to them and disciple them and work through some of these issues. And now with technology, with cell phones and social media, depression, anxiety, all that stuff is at an all-time high. And there are some great resources on social media. I'm a proponent of social media in the right space and how you use it correctly. I wrote a paper about that. But I always say there are TikTok pastors out there. I love your TikToks, by the way. But there are TikTok pastors who somebody says, I have a word from the Bible, and they present completely false information. And our students take that as gospel. They hear this and go, well, this guy said it on my phone, so I have to believe it now. And they're being challenged to believe, to think about what they believe and why they believe. There's this great phrase that says the world is catechizing your students at the same time that you're catechizing, you're training them. So who's winning the battle? Because the world is trying to get them to buy into all these things. And if you're not training them up right, if you're only doing the sports stuff and not focusing on the word, then their theology is a worldly theology, because they've read a story, or they've heard an Instagram post, or saw a TikTok from somebody who claims to be a pastor with the intentions of spreading essentially false gospels out there. And so I think that's the biggest thing that we have right now, is we have a generation of almost biblical illiterate adults who just took what their parents told them to be true without investigating these things. And it's bled over into students. And so finding these students who are wanting to know, like, okay, this is what you tell me to believe, but like you said, why do I believe this? Why does this apply to me? How do I apply these principles? How do I do these things? And training them up to know why they believe and what they believe. So when a pastor on TikTok, when somebody questions them, say, I mean, it's going to happen in their school. Somebody's say, oh, you're a Christian, that means you hate me because of this, or you hate this person because of this. And they need to know how to respond to that in love and in kind, but with truth, that they feel confident to stand up for those things. So I do think that the world is pressing in on believers. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we face right now, is Christians who claim Christianity but don't have any legs to stand on when they're questioned about it. And being able to defend their faith, but through love, to be able to defend that and say, this is not, my youth pastor says it, so I believe it. Like, that used to be great when I was in youth, that's what we said, you know, but now it's like, no, I need to know why I believe these things, because it matters, because someday I'm going to leave my ministry and I'm going to go to college and I'm going to be challenged with all kinds of things from the world. And if I don't have a great foundation that's built upon God and his word, then I'm going to fall the first time the wind blows. And I need to have a great foundation to be able to stand on.
100%, man. And that's what I think a lot of people don't see. And if you notice, one of the things that I made sure that I do with my TikToks, and one, I'm not going to get on there unless me and God are actually talking. I'm not going to say, hey, this is what God told me, or this is what we were talking about, if it wasn't true. You know what I mean? That's first and foremost. You know, you have to have that relationship with God where this is why I said it last week to somebody, was it's not just having those set moments with God. I want God to walk with me all day, you know? So when somebody's like, oh, well, you heard from God, how'd you do that? Well, I'm talking to God all day. Like, even when I'm working, you know, I'm talking to him. I'm God, man, thank you for this. Thank you for that. And I'm not just going to him with well, God, I need this. I need this. I'm not going with the checklist. And then second, everything that I say, I want to make sure everybody knows that it's backed up with a word. I'm not just saying this. This is what the Bible says about it too. You know, this is what I found in the Bible, because this is where I was led to it, you know? So that I think that's what a lot of ministry is missing, right? Is that it's well, I believe. Well, that's great that you believe that,
Right.
but what does the word say
Exactly.
about it? You know, what does God truly say in His Word, because it's His Word?
Mm.
What does His Word say about what you're saying? Does it back you up? Are you standing on no foundation, like you said?
Right.
Are you standing on sand?
Yep.
You know, it drives me insane because I've seen some guys on there and like, oh, God said blah blah blah, and I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, that is not that's way far left field what he said.
Yeah.
And you know, and like you said, with love, man, and that's what me and a guy got in a conversation today about. Well, how do you truly forgive somebody? I said, well, you know, one, I'm working on that myself.
Mm.
You know, that's just humanity. But God says that, you know, if we don't forgive, then He can't forgive us. And he was just like, oh. And I was like, yeah. I said, but it's the biggest thing is like, I said, you got to look at it. You're not hindering anybody but yourself.
Right.
I said, you're not hurting anybody but yourself.
That person doesn't care that you have.
Yeah. He does not have it. And a lot of times they don't even know.
Right.
Like I was mad at somebody for a week. You know, I'll be transparent. I was mad at somebody for a week because of something they said. And then the beginning of this week, it was like, God's like, you're still mad about that? Like, for real? Go talk to him. So I literally said, all right, brother, we got to have a conversation. I said, because I'm not going to let my emotions dictate who I am.
Right.
Right. So me and him had this conversation, and, you know, I feel like we hashed it out. Like, it's done in my books. Now, I did tell him, I said, hey, if you want to take it a step further, what you should probably do is apologize to the person who it actually affected. So I didn't like what you said. That's why I was mad about it. But you probably should apologize to the person that you were talking about. And, you know, I find that that's the biggest steps in our Christian walk is, well, how can you forgive somebody that does you wrong? Well, the only way that I was able to forgive them was I literally had to sit down, make time to have a conversation with this person and tell them, hey, man, I forgive you for this. But man, please do not do it again.
Yeah.
Because it took everything within me to not get so mad at you that I couldn't control myself. And I think that's one of the levels, you know, God's bringing you up. Like, see, but what would you do before? Oh, yeah, I would have not asked questions, and I would have just hauled off and smoked them. And God, it's one of those times where God's like, see, you are growing. You're still growing, you know. And I find it amazing that even as adults and somebody who's leading ministry, you're always growing. And that's what I've talked to Landon about was I love that you can never reach your pinnacle.
Oh, yeah.
You can never get too much.
Yep.
And I find it amazing because I've met some people who are like, I know everything because I know every verse. And you're just like, man, God changes what He's saying to me through that verse every day. I don't know about you, but I could read the same verse and I get something different out of it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's why it's called the living word. And, you know, when you actually sit back and you're like, man, I don't know everything. You know, I want to know more. God, can you please show me more? It takes you to that next level, you know?
Yeah, I truly believe there's not an end point in a Christian's life on growing and serving. He doesn't say that you get to serve until you've done it for 50 years, until you've done it for 20 years, until you've done one lock-in event, and then you're done. You know, we are called to serve. We're called to grow. You know, that is, you've got to keep growing in those things. I graduated with my master's degree last May. And so I had a guy in our church go, well, do you know everything now? And I was like, it drops in the ocean, like not even close. Like this is just a piece of paper, and I'm glad I got it. And I feel like I learned a lot, but I'm still growing now and using the tools that God has gifted me with, people in my life, other ministers in my life, guys that I know that are serving in ministry to talk through these things. Like there is a wealth of things for us to grow in. And so why wouldn't we want to use those and grow in that knowledge?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. 100%. So how do you truly express to your youth that it is a continual growth?
Yeah.
ironically, it led into this
Yeah,
question.
that works.
It worked out perfectly.
And I think it's just that it's telling students and showing students, hey, I don't have all the answers. Like I can get up and I can give you Greek words and I can give you theological standpoints and I can talk about this and I can back this up. But it doesn't mean that I know all. It just means that I've studied and I'm still studying. I'm still growing. One of my favorite books to preach from is the book of Jonah. I love the book of Jonah. I've probably preached on it more in my 16 years than any other book that I ever have. And I constantly feel like every time I read the book of Jonah, God reveals something different to me about the story that's never stood out. Or I hear somebody from like the Bible Project talk about the book of Jonah, and it puts a whole new spin on the story. Or you read a Warren Wiersbe commentary or a John MacArthur commentary, and you're like, I've never thought about it from this standpoint. And God is constantly changing those things. And I love that I'm still being challenged. And I tell students all the time, I don't have all this figured out. Like I am still growing. I'm still learning. I'm still messing up. I am not perfect. I am a sinner just like you are. Lecrae, the Christian rapper, says, I'm just a beggar trying to show another beggar where the bread's at. That's all I'm doing. That I'm no different than them, that I've set where they've set. I've grown where they've grown. Am I a little further along on my faith journey? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean I'm figured it all out yet. That I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and challenging them to go, if I'm telling you these things that I've walked through to prevent you from walking through them, why wouldn't you want to listen to that? Why wouldn't you want to seek that wise counsel? Because I can prevent you from making the mistakes that I made.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you that when I was in college and I was living selfishly and I was living for Josh, this is the damage it caused on my relationships. This is the damage it caused in my friendships. I've got friends that I had in college that don't go to church and kind of aren't interested in church, and they've seen the other side of me. They still, I think they question, should you really be teaching? Like, I remember what you were like, and I that's on me. Like that hurts my soul that I may have caused damage to somebody. But if I can prevent students from making some of those mistakes by sharing some of those things and to prevent them from falling in that, how much more could they grow and learn being ahead of the game by having some of this stuff laid out for them. So I think it's just a continual process, and it's a process that we never end on. And I think by showing them that you study the word, by sharing with them what you're reading in your quiet time, talking about your prayer life, talking about your testimony, your struggles as well, saying, I had a bad day today, but this is what God is going to help me do. This is how he helped me face this. This has helped me through this. They see the transparency in that. Youth and children can smell fake a mile away. Like if I get up and I've had a terrible day and I'm like, all right, guys, we're going to do, and they don't want that. They see enough fakeness in social media posts. So why would I want to bring that to the pulpit? Why would I want to bring that? And so I want to bring transparency and say, guys, I'm struggling with this.
Yeah.
Or this is a topic we're going to preach on because it's coming up next in the verses that we're walking through. I'm still wrestling with how I feel about these verses. Like this topic here, I'm struggling through this, but let's look at it from a biblical viewpoint and see where we can land together on this. And to let them see the process, pull back that curtain, like you said a while ago, and let them see that process.
Yeah.
And be able to grow alongside you.
And that's one of the things. And I wouldn't share this with you because I really feel like this will change the way that you view how you were in college, right? One of my greatest things that one of my friends has said to me was one of my friends that was with me when I was the angry person that everybody knew. And one of my friends said to me, he goes, because he works with me now.
Right.
And he goes, man, you are 100% different. And I was just like, good, dude. I am happy. Like, if you would have said I was the same, I would have been mad, So not only they could.
Right.
Like, oh, man, are you sure you should be doing that? They could look at it that way. But then again, you're like, well, yeah, I should because God's changed me completely. God, I'm not the same person. I am a new being that God created.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's one of the things that I think is awesome because, when it's one of the things I explained to some of these youth kids is, man, like y'all guys don't understand it because when you truly are just like, God, I don't want this no more. This is not me. I don't want to be this person. Then he's like, all right, cool. Yeah. Now let me work in you, now I can build in you because you don't want to be that old life that you were trying to live on your own. I think that's one of the biggest problems is everybody tries to walk through life by themselves.
Oh yeah.
Well, I got to take care of it. Well, did you take it to God? Have you asked God about that? Like, really, have you really took it to him? And don't get me wrong, dude. There's things in my life where I'm like, man, God, I really wish you'd move faster on that. And then at the same time, you're sitting there like, yeah, but that just means something greater is coming, But that comes with time. It's not always that easy, But that's one of my favorite things is that I can now go to people that were with me when I was in the Marine Corps, that was with me when I worked for the Department of Corrections, and they look at me and they're like, you are not the same person I remember. And I'm like, man, I'm glad.
Yeah.
I had somebody tell me, man, you're the nicest person I've ever met that has been in the military. And I was like, that's 100% God. And she like kind of looked at me weird. She's like, what do you mean by that? I said, I'm telling you right now, if you had met me like 4 years ago, you would have not like talked to me because I was a very mean person. I said, I probably wouldn't have talked to you anyways, That's one of the things I think is amazing is God can completely change who you are. And I think people walk in that, this is my family, this is everything. And that's one of the things I love. And I stand for 100% truly that, especially as fathers, especially as leaders, we are called to be able to stand as like those curse breakers, man. The people that stand in the fold. And I'm not going to let my kids see what some of the stuff that I seen when I was younger. I'm not going to let I'm not going to let my kids have to deal with a dad that was drinking, because I used to drink all the time. I used to be a low end of an alcoholic, as you'd say, but God completely changed me. I'm not that anymore. I've never that is not even in my vocabulary anymore. And I'm happy that I made the stand that my kids ain't going to see that. I made the stand against that spiritual heartbreak of anger, and that stemmed from my grandpa's grandpa, When you start digging at the problem, you really find out that it's not just you that's been dealing with this rooted issue that's stuck its roots so deep in your family. But the great thing with God is those roots can be dug up just as fast as they got planted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I was talking to my dad about was my dad's like, yeah, he said, I never would have known that my dad was actually treating me better than he got treated. He said, me and my dad were talking one day and he said that I was like, man, Dad, why did you just punch me and do all of these things to me when I was younger? He goes, well, at least I didn't tie you to a tree and beat you with a chain, because that's what my dad did to me. So we don't know what the better is, but until we make a stand where and that's my mom and dad. I got whipping, I got disciplined, but I didn't get beat. I didn't get stuck in a closet and left there with no food or anything like that. So you have to make a stand somewhere, and that's one of the things I love that God helps me be able to minister to our youth, that there's a stand that you can make, and he gives you all the tools to stand there and form the wall, even if you have to be the only one standing in your family. Because we have some kids that are the only ones standing in their whole family. I said, well, guess what? Now you get to be that beacon of light. You get to be that lighthouse in the middle of the storm. I said, that's the fantastic thing about it. You see all the, like, man, it's going to be hard. It might be hard, but guess what? God's built you strong.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's awesome to just be able to minister to kids in that way.
Yeah. And that's what I love about youth ministries. You never know a student's story or what they're going through until they kind of open up. But you've got them from all walks of life and different points in their life. And as they're all walking through these different things, they get to come together and celebrate God, but you get to help minister to them where they're at. So being able to see them in those different things that they're walking through, and there is darkness in this world that they are walking through every single day. And we get to be that salt and light to them so they can be salt and light to their families and to their friends. And I always equate it like this, that if a student's life, I tell students all the time, you're bringing a student to me, you're bringing your best friend to me. You're like, hey, you got to come to youth. You got to hear my youth pastor. If their life is this still pond and they come on a Wednesday night and they hear me preach the gospel, I'm throwing pebbles. It's causing ripples. But for you to live out your faith, for you to be who God called you to be in school and on the football field and in the locker room and on the basketball, wherever it is, you're authentic in your faith, you're throwing boulders because they see the life that you're living and they want to be a part of that. I can preach the gospel all day long to them, but that's a small thing. I'm sowing seeds and waiting for the Lord of the harvest to come up. But by you living this out, you're having a much bigger impact on their life as we train these students up who are in those dark places and walking through those things, to be able to face those things, or to say, I'm having a hard time, this is what I'm going through. And you get to say, well, let me share with you a little bit about this. And in those moments that you get to have those conversations and watch them break those chains and be able to remove some of those things from their life to grow up in their faith, not just for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the world around them, as they're truly catching on and learning to live this faith out.
That's good. I like that a lot. I also want to, I 100% agree with you on that, because like we said earlier, man, they are God's ambassador.
Yeah.
Right. They are going to be able to walk way places that we were not going to be able to even reach.
When I tell students, and I tell my church this all the time, it's the Great Commission, not the Great Suggestion.
Yeah.
It's not, you get to go out and make disciples if you feel like it, if you like the person. There's not stipulations. I love there's no asterisks, by that verse, that it's, we are called to go out and do this. So you're either doing it or you're not. There's no, you're not lukewarm.
There's not a maybe.
Yeah, there's not a maybe. We are called to go out and do this, regardless of how you feel that day. And God gets to use you in spite of yourself sometimes to be able to live that out.
That's awesome, dude. So we'll wrap this up with this last question. What is your advice that you'd give somebody as they start out their ministry journey?
So as somebody who's getting into ministry, so I've got, not to brag, but I've got several students that have been under me that are serving in ministry now. And the advice I'd give them is the same stuff that Colton talked about on his podcast with you, is to start serving now. That we are not called at a certain age to serve. Like you are called to start serving as believers in Christ. We are to serve. If something small is stacking chairs, sweeping floors, helping out a ministry that you're in, versus, hey, I feel a call to preach. Well, that's awesome. Go talk to your youth pastor. I love it when a student approaches me and is like, hey, I feel like maybe God's calling me to a youth pastor someday, or how can I do this? And I get to walk through them with my journey, my calling. And I get to say, hey, why don't you preach on a Wednesday night? And they swallow really hard and go, no way. I'm like, if God's calling you to do this, you can't do it around your friends. You can't do it to anybody. So let's work on a sermon. So I get to take a student. I've got a student right now that I'm working on who's going to get to preach later this spring or summer. And he's got a message God laid on his heart. So we're working through how to put a sermon together based off this scripture. So he gets to see my process, not that it's the end all be all final process, but he gets to write a sermon and he gets to deliver that sermon to his friends, and gets to that training, because a lot of guys show up to youth ministry with no experience going from children's to youth and kind of showing up going, I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm just going to do like I've always done it, but get to have some of those experiences serving. Not that God can't use those experiences, but serve in children's ministry, serve in the senior adult ministry, go help a widow, clean her yard up, go serve your church, ask your pastor, hey, how can I serve you? Like, I feel it's called to ministry. What can I do to help you out? Whether it's praying for people, whether it's helping clean up after a service, like find a way to start serving now, and serving with a grateful heart. And watch how God uses that in future, because ministry is serving. Like, yes, there is the Wednesday night activity and the preaching of the word, but the rest of my time is serving a church. It's helping a gentleman out yesterday morning unload 15 tables in the back of his truck to carry back into our Family Life Center. It's building slides in our sanctuary, getting ready for a service on Sunday. It's uploading a podcast on Wednesday. It's doing these things, but it's also the other stuff. So it's not just, well, I want to stand on stage and preach. Well, if that's all you want to do, then you're not in it for the right reason. There's a pastor that we listen to that says, if you worry about the depth of your ministry, God will worry about the width. He'll take care of the width. And so he will give you people to hear the word. So be faithful. Study. I tell students all the time, start growing, develop habits now. As busy as students are, they will never be any less busy than they are as students. If you can fit 6 hours a fortnight into your day, you're not that busy. But start developing habits, because if you can develop habits about spending time with God in prayer and in study now, then later as you build things into your life, you build them around the things you have developed. So you're not trying to fit God into a busy schedule. You're trying to fit a busy schedule around God. And so develop those things now while you're young, while you have this opportunity. Develop tithing habits, develop studying God's word, develop an attitude of worship. Working on those things now, and then watch God develop those. And I said this is in the context of probably a student who's starting out in ministry or feels that call to ministry. If you can find joy from anything else, do that, because true joy comes from ministry, but ministry is hard. Ministry is broken hearts. Ministry is loving the church when it doesn't love you. It's dealing with hard people and big personalities, but it's always worth it. I've been, like I said, 16 years at my church, and I could probably count the number of bad days I've had on 2 hands in 16 years of ministry, because He has protected us and He's kept us close. And but it's hard, but it's fruitful, and it's always worth it. But be ready, prepare your heart, prepare your mind now. Start studying, start serving now. Don't wait.
That's good. I think one of the things that is like extremely impactful to me, it stood out real big when you said it, and I love it because I say this to people all the time, is just because this is the way that I do it doesn't mean this is the way that you're going to do it.
Absolutely.
I think it's one of the things that we all can grow in as stepping up into those leadership positions, is the fact that God made you to be able to do it the way He called you to do it, not the way He called. So He wouldn't ask me to do it the way that you do it,
right?
And vice versa.
Yep.
He wouldn't ask me to go up there and act like Josh Pollock. Wait, what? Yeah. Like that would sound silly, but it's amazing, and that's why I think God's like whole church all coming together is the biggest end goal, is because we are all come from different walks of life, and we all come, but we all bring something to the table. It's like recruiting an entire military of everybody that believes the same thing and is willing to stand up for the same thing. But, I 100% agree with what you said, man. That was a fantastic advice that you could give somebody. Because one thing for sure, if we're not studying God's word and feeding ourself with His bread, we're failing, man. How can I minister to you if I'm not intaking the word?
If my cup's empty, I can't pour out to anybody.
Yes,
absolutely.
100%.
When I love the way you said that. So Ephesians 2:10, for we are His workmanship. That word workmanship is poema. We were created by God. It's like God wrote this poem that's us. So everything I love about myself and hate about myself, God put together for a reason. And He's going to use those in ministry. He's going to use those in your everyday life. So the things that you struggle with about yourself, God can still use those in spite of yourself. When you look at Moses and being called to ministry, he's like, well, I don't talk well. My tongue's lazy. And God says, did I not give you the words? Do I not give you the tongue? I'll teach you what to say.
Yeah.
And so in spite of our things that we don't even like, especially when it comes to ministry stuff, God will use us in spite of those things. I've seen students who are like, I could never be on stage. I've got, matter of fact, the guy, the high school student that's leading worship for us right now, when he first came into youth ministry, he kind of wanted to hide in the bathroom because it was overwhelming to be in a room with that many students. And so I got him involved serving on the slides. And now he leads worship for us. Who would have thought that this 7th grader who was like begging his mom not to bring him to youth because it was too much for him, who now stands on stage and faithfully leads worship for us every Wednesday. That in spite of who he was, this is who God's made him to be, and he gets to explore that and express that.
Awesome. That's awesome. Well, again, man, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
I think before I wrap up, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah. So we have a podcast at our church. It's called Words Matter Podcast. You can search it, Words Matter Podcast, FBC Seminole, anywhere you listen to podcasts. We have done it for about 2 years now. We kind of started right after COVID started. And we took like a year break. We got super busy and it wasn't a priority. And so we've just started back. We're on episode 5 of being back. We've talked through, if you look at some of our old episodes, what we're going through as a church. We went from a pastor-led system to an elder-led church. As we read scripture, we felt like there's a clear mandate for churches to be elder-led. Not that that's a one-size-fits-all, but we feel like that was the best model for us. And if scripture says it, we want to be close to it. So we moved to an elder-led. We talk about that process, the scripture we walk through, the pastoral epistles, how we arrived to this, the journey we were on. And now we're about episode 5. We're taking theological issues that we wrestle with today, things that we see in our culture, and how we can stand up to those as Christians. So we talked about election. We talked about love. We've talked about issues you hear about in everyday life. And it's, if I hear these issues on TikTok or on Twitter or on a Facebook post or just conversations, I want to know where I stand on these things. So we present these theological issues. We talk about social issues, issues that you see in society today, and how Christians can be involved in those, how they can stand up against those, how they can hear these things and know this is how I'm supposed to respond to this. And it's, like I said, it's not the end all be all, but we get together with two of our elders at our church, our Pastor Nick and Garrett. They're both pastors and elders at our church. And we have these conversations about 30, 40 minutes. We figured we'd try to keep it short. We used to go really long, but we thought we'd keep it short for drive time. And yeah, so we record every Wednesday. We drop new episodes. You can, if you got a question for us, if you're watching this and you want to drop us a question, wordsmatterpod@gmail.com. But Words Matter Podcast. We believe words matter. God gives us words. Words are important. The words that we use are important. So we believe words matter. So that's kind of where we landed. But yeah, every Wednesday we tackle a different theological debate, almost, if you will, a theological topic. And we just talk about it from today's standpoints and how we can face those things.
That's good, man. And words do matter. You know, power of life and death is in the tongue.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, again, man, I want to thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I was always honored when you asked me. I've seen a couple of your videos and stuff. So when you text me, I was like, I don't have anything to say. Why? There's so many other people he could ask. So I really appreciate it. I was honored that you would ask.
I mean, I wouldn't ask unless God was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's rock it. And, that's one of the biggest things is a lot of people that I ask, they're like, I can't do it because I don't feel like I have something to present, right? And in all actuality, man, this is one of the things we hit on in this episode so much is God has so much that he can do through you that you don't even see yourself.
Get out of your way.
Absolutely. I actually just was messaging one of the female leaders that I'm going to be having on my podcast earlier today, and she's like, man, I'm not this person. I was like, good. I'm glad. I'm glad you're not that person because I want you to be on the show.
Absolutely.
But man, again, thank you for coming on. Come back next week for this amazing next leader that we have. Again, Josh Pollock, Words Matter Podcast.
That's right.
See y'all guys next week.